So here is John Stuart Mill's greatest happiness principle, which it's important to note that this is different in form from Kant's categorical imperatives. Why? What do I say that? Well, I mean, Kant's categorical imperatives are imperatives. They tell you to do something. This is merely a definition of right and wrong. It doesn't tell you to do anything. Take a look at it. The creed, which accepts as the foundation of morals utility of the greatest happiness principle, holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure in the absence of pain, by unhappiness, pain, and the privation of pleasure. It's a definition of what makes an action right or what makes it wrong. It's not an injunction, it's not a command, it's not an imperative to do or not do something. So, if we want to make it useful, that is, if we want to make it into a decision making principle, make it into something that can provide a framework for action, we got to change it a little bit. Right? I mean, it may seem obvious, but we do have to change it. Something like that. Always do that which produces the most happiness and the least unhappiness. I think it's important to note that, at least as far as it's the principle of utilitarianism in its most famous and influential place, which is John Stuart Mill's book Utilitarianism. It's not really a rule; it's a definition of right and wrong. But I think we can turn it into a rule without changing the spirit of it in any way. Always do that which produces the most happiness and the least unhappiness. So, it's an important principle. I mean, Mill would say, as Kant would say of his categorical imperatives, it's already built into our thinking and action. And I think they're both right. One of the things to note is that, okay, this is a form of consequentialism. Right? That is, unlike Kant, the moral value, the moral quality of an action is determined by what flows from it, what its results are, rather from the intention behind it or the rule that it's following. Everything about utilitarianism is about consequences and results. And so, what's important, and what will certainly be important when we start reading, when we read Hans Jonas's essay next week, is that we must have a firm notion of what the results of our actions will be in order to make judgments about whether they're right or wrong. That is, if I'm thinking of doing something and I want to know whether it's a morally right thing to do or wrong thing to do, I have to have a fairly firm grasp of what the results of my actions will be. Elsewise, I can't make the judgment. So, consequentialism is always a kind of an anticipation, a guess, a hypothesis, a forecasting of the future. And a lot of the time, that forecast seems pretty obvious. Right? I mean, things that cause people pleasure and things that cause people pain sometimes can be quite obvious. But when we're trying to do the fine calculations, maybe it's not so obvious. And one of Jonas's points will be, well, when we're talking about ramifications of our actions that extend indefinitely into the future, which when we talk about modern technology, we're talking about, then it can be difficult, if not impossible, to forecast the long run effects of our actions. But that's a matter for next week. So, yeah, always do that which produces the most happiness and least unhappiness seems to be the rule of action that comes from utilitarianism. It's the consequences of your actions that matter. So to responsibly do anything or refrain from doing anything, we have to have a pretty good idea what those consequences are and how obviously focusing on how they affect human welfare, to what degree they will increase, decrease, or just leave alone the general level of the happiness, the welfare of those that are affected by what we do.